Welcome to the Indiana Jewish Historical Society Oral Histories. My name is Emma Maggart, and this is episode 4 of our series Lafayette Lives. Some of our contributors prefer to remain anonymous, so I'll be sharing the thoughts and stories of one of our contributors today in my own words. So this woman she was born in Indianapolis, and she ended up moving to the city of Lafayette at the age of 7. Her father owned, well, it was her family, but her father was a pharmacist and owned a drugstore in downtown Indianapolis called Silver Drugs. And they ended up moving to Lafayette in 1952 because her father wanted to join Louis Winsky in his scrap metal business here in Lafayette. There's a smaller community, more intimate community to grow up in than the large city of Indianapolis at that time. She says it was not traumatic for her to move. It was an enjoyable experience. Actually, the home they moved into, there was a girl that lived next door that was her exact same age. This woman was named Tara, and the two of them were friends throughout childhood, very close friends. Her family did not choose to move to a Jewish neighborhood. That was not really an important factor to their family. However, being close to a Jewish community was important. Her mother was very involved in the Temple, Israel, of West Lafayette, and her father was on the board. The next door neighbor, her friend Tara, was her best friend growing up, and the friend was a very observant Catholic. And she says that she remembers helping this friend with her catechism, and her friend would come with her to temple. So there was a very normal and natural feeling overlap between different faiths, and there was never, she says there was never an attitude of exclusion, but with her family being Jewish or vice versa among any of the people of different faiths within the community. She said Lafayette was a very open attitude, and their temple was quite reform. The girls were not bat mitzvahed, so there were not really the large celebrations that go along with that. A few of the men were bar mitzvahed, but she says it wasn't a common practice by any means, as it would be in a more Orthodox community. There was a joint Sunday school, and neither the shul nor the temple Israel could afford to have their own program. So there wasn't really a separatist mentality, but there was, they both operated and had their own services and their own community in that sense. There is still a joint Sunday school today. There have been several issues over the years, but there hasn't been really one delineating issue between the two. So they still operate a joint Sunday school quite amicably. Non-affiliate children also can go to the school. It operates slightly differently, the process for them, but it's open to anyone who wants to participate in this part of the Jewish faith here. This woman's father, Henry, grew up in an Orthodox community in Indianapolis, and part of their reason for moving was he liked the more reformed mentality here at the temple in Lafayette. This was the 1960s and 70s. At that point, he became the president of the temple. So he wanted to remain very involved in the Jewish culture and Jewish faith, but preferred the reform mentality to the Orthodox mentality that's more common in city communities. Her mother was extremely involved in the sisterhood at the temple. They didn't really have women on the board at this point, but she was involved in women's organizations, women's auxiliaries, hospital auxiliaries, as well as the many fundraisers they did at the temple that I'll share more information on in a bit here. The family kept their attachments to Inley very close. They had a large friend groups and family groups there, friends being the Rothbards, Ackermans, Kreutz, Ephraimson. There was much social travel back and forth for events, and her family hosted a lot of social events here in Lafayette for the families from Indianapolis to come visit here. And that she said that was rather common to keep your ties between your Jewish friends and Jewish communities in the larger cities or other communities when you moved away, to keep that network very strong within the state. Her family had Jewish friends here, but it was not the same as in Indianapolis. There was a poker club with Jewish couples. The family belonged to the country club, and there was quite a bit of social interaction there, but it was not exclusively with Jewish families. as she says, was more common in Indianapolis. There was quite a bit of integration and assimilation here between people of other faiths, people that just were not observant, and the individuals that happened to be involved in the Jewish communities. There was a lot of mentality more of Lafayette as a whole than separating people based on their heritage or culture or religious practices. She doesn't remember there being any attitude of anti-Semitism or a blatant an acceptance or exclusion of her or her family because they were Jewish. So that, I think that speaks rather well of Lafayette, that she doesn't have any memories of exclusion, and that overall it was a pleasant experience for her. The Jewish identity was important, but it was not something that really defined her experience here in a negative way, which I find to be consistent among the many individuals I've spoken to through this series, Lafayette Lives. In high school, she spent 1 year at Jefferson High School, and then her and her parents decided that it would be a good experience for her to move to a private school in Michigan. And this was Kingswood, associated with the boys' school, Cranbrook. She said it was a very different environment living there than living in this small town. Lafayette is a city, but compared to places such as Indianapolis or East Coast cities, it has a very different small town feel to it here. So moving to Michigan and going to this private school was a good growing experience for her socially, and she enjoyed her time there. She mentions that it's a boarding school, but not everyone was required to board. So there were 59 girls, her being one of them, that boarded in Michigan, and she was the only Jewish student that did board. And she came home for summer break and winter break and things like that. But she spoke a lot about just the different mentality there and how that prepared her for later. After graduating, she went to the University of Miami for a year and joined the Sigma Delta Tau sorority, which happens to be a Jewish sorority. And she talked about that experience, how different that is also from Lafayette, that growing up a Jew, being very, very comfortable in that culture, and then experiencing other Jewish individuals, interacting with them and seeing how it can be quite different depending on what type of community you're raised in. She mentions that while at the University of Miami in Florida, many of the girls in her sorority, many of the Jewish individuals were from the East Coast, large cities, New York, Boston, that sort of thing, and that their Jewish identity, their attitude toward that part of their own identity was quite different from hers. The commonality of Jewish culture in some of those larger cities of the East Coast and cities such as Indianapolis in the Midwest, Jewish culture is much more common or well known, even if one is not Jewish. And the identity she feels is much stronger in those individuals than her own identity, where she knew it was a part of her, but not exactly something that defined her. And it just happened to be one of many, many defining aspects about her. She talks about the difference there. She transferred to the University of Indiana University at Bloomington, to study political science for 3 years, and she stayed in the Sigma Delta Tau sorority, the Jewish sorority. This is actually, in a way, how she met her husband. He also happened to be Jewish. Her family it was never an expectation that she must only date or consider marrying a Jewish man. However, her husband's family, he was from Indianapolis. His family was very much of the mentality that it was only acceptable to date and marry a Jewish woman. She shared that he had to be rather secretive if he would happen to be involved with any women who were not Jewish. But he met her, and through a cousin of hers, actually, his name was Mark, at Indiana University, and it worked out very well between them, and they've been happily married for 54 years. Shortly after they were married, she and her husband moved back to Indianapolis, and he sold insurance there quite successfully for many years. Her father, Henry, who was deeply involved in Oscar Winsky's steel business here in Lafayette, offered her husband a job to come and work with the family business here. Her husband, Mark, had always been been rather drawn to the idea of a close family business and community involvement and that sort of thing. So in 1971, they moved from Indianapolis back to Lafayette, Indiana. She has 3 children, and all 3 of those children are currently still involved in that very same business today. It's been something that's stayed in their family and remained quite prominent in the community, and their family has developed not only a community sense within the Jewish community, but also with this business. So it's really some nice involvement they've found here in Lafayette. This woman that was speaking with me is also involved with Arnie's, the very well-known pizza restaurant in Lafayette that has expanded to Indianapolis and several other small communities around central Indiana. So some information about how Arnie's got started. Arnie Cohen was the founder of Arnie's Pizza, and he had an uncle, Sig Cohen, who owned a restaurant called Sergeant Blitz. When Arnie was a young man in high school growing up, he was able to help this Uncle Sig run the restaurant, kind of understand how one does that, what are some ins and outs of the business. And Arnie really grew to love catering to the community and all of the different aspects that go into running a community restaurant. Arnie went to Indiana University and he graduated and went into the Army. And then in 1965, he started Arnie's at Market Square, which that location is still in thriving business today. Brad is his youngest son. He has 3 children, Arnie does. So the youngest son, Brad, was not quite born when they opened the restaurant in 1965. Today, Brad is now the owner of Arnie's in Lafayette, and many, including this woman, have said that he is very much the spirit of his father. He is extremely involved in the community. He doesn't know a stranger. He's a very good fit to take over the business. So in 1980, they opened in 1965. In 1980, Arnie decided to open a second location in Indianapolis. His oldest son, Kurt, was living in Indy at the time. And so Kurt was the one responsible for making sure that the business was going well and kind of keeping an eye on it after Arnie went and opened the initial, their second initial location of Arnie's. And Kurt is still involved with their new location in Indianapolis today. It moved from its original place, but they still have a thriving business in Indy. In the late 80s, after this Indianapolis restaurant had been opened, Arnie decided to open more franchises around central Indiana, places such as Rossville, Frankfort, New Albany. And he also opened a commissary, which making his own sauces and meats and really branding his products to a specific pizza restaurant. One thing that this woman said was important to take away about Arnie is that everyone knew him and he knew everybody. Arnie Cohen was a very prominent member of the community. He was invested in his community. He was invested in his restaurant, his temple, his neighborhood, and his community really was his world. And Brad, his youngest son, who now runs Lafayette, Arnie's location is very much like Arnie, she said, as many have mentioned, that he has done a very, very good job of carrying on his father's spirit and keeping that going with the Arnie's brand in Lafayette, the whole institution. There are many Cohens in Lafayette. It's a well-known name, but this restaurant, this venture was really all Arnie. He has uncles, Mickey, Bill, and Izzy, that were all involved in the motor parts business. So it was really, I suppose, a family tendency to open their own business, and they were entrepreneurs. But Arnie and really set out his own venture by creating Arnie's Pizza and the institution that has become for many locals around here. Arnie was also involved in many of the Temple Israel fundraisers within the community, and this woman told me quite a bit about their fundraisers. In a previous episode, I was speaking with some community members about the smorgasbord put on at Catholic Central High School. You may remember that from a different episode. This woman also shared with me some information and some fond memories of that experience, how it really was an all-out community event. Yes, it was a fundraiser for the temple, but she and many others have stated over and over again that it was really goodwill for the community. It was put on by Temple Israel members. It was focused on Jewish foods and celebrating that culture, but it was put on at Central Catholic High School cafeteria. Many of the people that attended were Protestants. Not everyone that attended practiced religious faith at all. It was mainly the unity of the Lafayette community and enjoying that sense of community, regardless of observance of a specific faith or not. It was a very community event. Arnie was very much involved in this, according to this woman. He was the expert in setting up the catering and restaurant business. So he would arrange what the buffet style, seatings, wait staff, everything, and made it a really professional and refined event. It was a great sense of community and bringing together the community of Lafayette. Another big fundraiser for Temple Israel was their art auction. Linda Cohen, who was Arnie Cohen's wife, was very, very much involved in this art auction, setting that up. And that would have been in the 70s that they first started doing this. The temple would contact dealers in New York to bring art to the temple here. They would set up cocktails and take orders, and the community would come out once again, regardless of religious orientation or cultural orientation. They would partake in this and enjoy the sense of community and the art education that came to this very refined and fun community bonding event that all benefited Temple Israel. That event has faded away, as has the smorgasbord, but there are many fond memories, and they both remain as bright spots on the record and those I've spoken with to talk about the history of Lafayette. The third really long-lasting, long memory fundraiser was the deli sale that began in 1994. The woman I was speaking to told me quite a bit about this. She really associates this one as being a great bonding experience within the temple. Shoulder to shoulder work all day on the Sunday before, making the sandwiches. The target audience was different corporations, small businesses, Purdue University departments, contractors, things like that. Around Lafayette, and the temple would come together and make these lunches and deliver them. And there was a whole process of having one person driving the food trucks, another person arranging appointments, going in, really having face-to-face contact with every single person that was involved in supporting this effort to support the temple. This event, the Deli Lunch fundraiser, is hopefully to return next fall. It's always, since it started in '94, it's been a very thriving fundraiser. And the only reason it did not take place was because of COVID the past year. So the temple is hopeful that this will return, as it's a great bonding experience within the temple and within the community. Of the many experiences we discussed, this woman left me with a last rather important and rather lovely way to finish the interview. She said that many people thought they would come to Purdue for a short while and end up staying forever. I find that a common thread with several people I've spoken with from this area. Lafayette and West Lafayette is a really great place to live because you have the university, the major businesses. It's only an hour from Indy and 2 hours from Chicago. It's very comfortable because you have the intellectual, the business, the people that support a really good, diverse life. And she says that it's a really good cross-section of the population. She specifically said it's a good place to live as long as you get to see the rest of the world and you choose to return. I find that very important. She is someone that has lived quite literally all over the nation, many cities in the Midwest, many cities on the East Coast. She's spent time in Europe, and she's chosen to come back here and invest in that really intimate community connection and staying in Lafayette. And she is very happy here, as many of the people are, and it's a unique place to live as a Jewish individual with the strong Jewish community, albeit small. It's very invested in the Jewish culture, and The Jewish culture is very accepted within the community culture. The integration is quite lovely here, and this woman gave a lot of insightful perspective on the Jewish experience living long-term in Lafayette, Indiana. Join us next week for another episode of Lafayette Lives. Thank you very much.